we've got some angry parents out there, Blatant. What are they talking about? What are they saying here? Oh.
You're muted.
Blatant, I think
Well,
you're
I'm
muted.
not the only one.
That's all right. It happens.
We're taking
That's
turns, apparently.
Everybody gets a turn.
That's right.
So all around the U.S., parents are asking whose child is it anyway. Several parental rights groups have been making a major push in the current election cycle. I guess you'd say the previous, just past election cycle. These parental right groups have been pushing out their candidates in school boards all over the country into our children's education, into public schools. And I, as a parent of an elementary school age child, I have plenty to say about this, but I will take some opinions from the squad before I dive in. So, SR, what do you think about these parental right groups?
Yeah, this is something that hits home for sure. There's a huge push for this in Tennessee. There's a lot of this that is focused on what's called that charter or voucher school type thing. And so that definitely has some pretty gross and disgusting roots. I'll touch on some of it a little bit. For those of many of our viewers may not have been around at this time, but one of the places that this whole like parental rights thing really started gaining traction was in the 50s and 60s. And I'm not positive that there was anything like massively important that was going on back then for public schools. I'm not positive. Oh wait, that's right. Desegregation was happening, and it just so happened that the parents that wanted to assert their rights did so at the schools where suddenly Black students were allowed to be at. Gosh, that's such a weird coincidence that happened. It couldn't possibly be the intention behind it, right, guys? Right? I mean, Cindy, am I off base here? Am I just, totally head in the clouds?
That sounds so paranoid. I mean, yeah, people aren't that bad,
Right.
People are nice. Yeah, but I'd like to focus on a couple sentences from the article. I quote, traditionally non-partisan local school boards have become fiercely political amid entrenched battles over the teaching of race, history, and sexuality. Candidates opposing what they see as woke ideology in public schools have sought to gain control of school boards across the US and overturn policies deemed too liberal. And I have to say, from an external perspective, from someone who doesn't live in the US, I don't see any valid reason why each state should decide what they teach their kids. That's the first thing. Why do you have 50 school boards that decide what is taught? That makes no sense. And because now the US is in a cultural literal war, education becomes a battlefield. It's just another medium to impose their political view to people who can't stand seeing the world moving on while they stay behind because they can't keep up. And the reason why they can't is because those parents in their time didn't get a proper education. This issue is definitely not new. The US's education has been failing for, let's say, half a century, if I'm being generous, especially in rural areas. And now children are paying the price.
Yeah. Teo, what are your thoughts on this? Is this something that's a big movement in your area?
Oh no, in here, down here, despite this being a third world country, we don't have the third world country behavior of the USA. So in here, people actually know that education is important and they put a lot of emphasis on it. And we don't have political parties trying to fight against education because I think our politicians understand how important it is to educate people. Just kidding. They are erasing history in here as well, mostly due to certain political agenda. And it's interesting because do you remember those guys I was mentioning in the first segment? Certain political group, what was it? Oh yeah, Republicans and conservative groups, right? Those guys, can you believe those guys who are attacking people for existing are the same ones that are trying to manipulate what you can and cannot teach to children? They are starting a war against something called woke ideology, and apparently woke ideology is anything that teaches about race, history, and sexuality. So I was thinking about what this means, and it means that children from my country, my Latin American country, in another continent, very soon are going to know way more about the history of the USA than children from the USA, because these people want to ban anything that is not patriotic. So I guess everything about slavery, everything about segregation, all the ugly part of history that we should know because, those who do not learn about their history are condemned to repeat it. Well, maybe those guys want to repeat those awful parts about history, and they don't want anybody telling them, hey, your side did this or people did this in the past, so we shouldn't do this. Oh, no, come on. They want, their Christian Sharia law imposed, so of course they don't want people learning about their past.
Yeah, definitely. And Blatant, please give us I don't have any kids. Teo and Cindy aren't a part of this. Let's call it broken to be kind to it system.
Sorry, just
one
word. I love how they, for some reason, added fear to furries being taught in history and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's definitely there's a lot of weird arguments in my opinion. But Blatant, you're actually dealing with this on the ground level.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this like? How is this? How does this come about in your daily life, in your children's life?
It's insane. I have to teach my son a lot at home just to make sure that, like, I live in Hawaii, so it's not as bad. We've lived in Texas before. Thankfully, we're not there. So my son knows what slavery is. Go figure. But what what kills me with these people is the sense of superiority. Like, you have to feel like you are superior to even fight this hard to essentially parent my child under the guise of your rights as a parent. How does that make sense? Like, what gives you the right to decide my child's education? This, again, it's a case of people needing to look at who's on their side. Because who's absolutely not on the parental rights people's side? Teachers and teachers unions. They're not on that side. So you might be on the wrong side of this issue. It would be one thing if they were actually like fighting for better education, more funding, more books, not less. But in every case, we just see groups like Moms for Liberty only fighting to take away from children's education. They want less inclusion, less actual history, and less autonomy for the people who actually spend their lives trying to educate our kids. And what really pisses me off is that these are the people that continuously are the loudest voices in the room. As a parent of a child in elementary school, we are subjected to the loudest, most ignorant people in the room in every single case. And these are the people that are railing against CRT.
Yeah, don't even know what the letters stand for, do they?
If you ask these people, like, I've seen several interviews with like just man on the street type interviews, and you ask these people who are like literally out with signs and saying ban CRT and all this, and you ask them what is CRT, and I don't know, but I don't like it. Like, what? Excuse me? Like, and I can clear this. I can clear it up for anybody that's not in the U.S. and you don't know what CRT stands for. I can clear it up for you and for these parental right people. CRT is actual American history.
Ooh.
That's all. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And the reason these patriots, with the hardest of air quotes, these patriots, the reason they don't want the actual history taught is because they don't want to have to explain to their children why they're flying a a Confederate flag in the front yard
Yeah.
after those children learn what it actually represents.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to explain that away.
Yeah.
They don't want to have the hard conversations about sexuality and American history of marginalizing any sect of society that doesn't fit a cis white male idea. The ideology of a cis white male. Anybody that doesn't fit that are marginalized. You don't want to explain that to your kids. So instead, you just rail against anybody that's teaching them something that you don't want them to know because it makes your life more difficult. Here's some advice. All the parents out there. This is advice that I've taken myself. Talk to your kids. Help them with their homework.
Yeah.
Understand what they're learning. And if you don't like what they're learning, they still have to get a passing grade. So teach them what you want them to know at home. At home. Like I teach my son. My son isn't learning critical race theory. So I'm teaching him that at home. Your kids aren't involved in that. I don't want my kids to be involved in your child's education. Again, the hardest of air quotes. That's all I've got to say. I'm off my high horse.
All very, very good points. All very good points, man. Cindy, any other thoughts on parental rights? Do they have rights? Should they be doing this? I mean, what do you think?
It's a concerted effort. We talked about earlier about targeting LGBTQ people. Now it's basically the same, but for children. And so last week, the former president of the United States had a guest in his house for Thanksgiving. And a guy, if you listen to him talking, he literally says that he wants Sharia law in the US. That's literally his word. He wants to criminalize homosexuality, criminalize sodomy. He wants to remove the right to vote for women. And this guy was having Thanksgiving dinner with the former president, who is the focal point of all the fascist movements in the US. So there is a concerted effort behind all of this. It's not just random angry people, angry, stupid, ignorant people. It's a trend, and I'm really scared for the US right now. I'm really scared about all the people living in there because, yeah, we avoided the worst in the last election, but I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon.
Yeah, and that I'm glad that you brought up the former president, voicing some of these issues as well, because again, like I said at the top, the charter school and voucher program for public education is definitely wrapped up into this parental rights movement. And the former Secretary of Education under our former president, Betsy DeVos, she specifically said that one of the reasons that she backs the charter and voucher program and these parental rights is because it is an attempt to bring God's kingdom to earth. That is a direct quote. Okay. If you go look at these charter schools, again, this is something that is definitely happening in Tennessee. Recently, our governor actually got into some pretty hot water over this. Hopefully, it will actually lead to some results. But when you go look at these charter schools, these organizations, they are oftentimes financially backed by very deep-pocketed far-right Christian nationalist institutions and organizations. It's just blatant, guys. And not only that, that's bad enough. But the fact that the vast majority of these places have policies that are anti-LGBT, that are filled with completely trying to obfuscate the past and say, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. The effects of racism in America haven't been that problematic. I mean, this is something across the freaking board. And on top of all of that, there are still some people out there who say, but the children do better in these schools. But every single time we have ever investigated, every single time we have ever checked score for score, they are doing exactly the same as their counterparts in public schools in those areas, or they are doing worse. Every single time we have looked into this, and yet this movement still keeps going and it still keeps growing. And one of the reasons is because in the United States, we just don't vote for local stuff. When it comes to comptroller, when it comes to school board, when it comes to mayor, we just don't vote. And so if nobody else is voting, they'll put up their shitty candidate and they'll pull out the biography of Ruby Bridges because, wouldn't want anybody to read a book about a 6-year-old girl trying to go to school or anything. That would just bring up all kinds of problems, I guess. But again, before I go completely off the rails, Teo, maybe rein it in a little bit or give us some more thoughts at least.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I'm surprised. I didn't know that the PO, that guy, the former president, that guy, he had openly admitted that he wants this thing that I'm so terrified of, this Christian Sharia law in the USA. Now I will just have to quote the guy instead of keep explaining people why that's the way where they are going to. No, good to know that he's not shy about it. But okay, I want to talk about a short anecdote. I will do it quickly. About this, people, please read the article. It's called Too Hyperbolic School Board Parental Rights. And as soon as I read this title, Too Hyperbolic, I remembered. Sorry, I got distracted. I remembered something that happened in one of my shows. I have a live streaming show where people can come and argue. And in the chat, there was a guy who was too smart for us, according to him. So he wanted to see if we were able to explain some things before he decided that we were worth his time. He made 5 very basic and silly questions. And when one of my guests was explaining that God is a hyperbolic idea of someone who has a lot of power, he wrote in the chat that hyperbolic was not a real word, that we were making up some words. And of course, I had to laugh. This made us realize how extremists tend to be people without a lot of education. The same happens with flat earthers. The same happens with conspiracionists. So why is this that people without much education are trying to do so many harmful things? And I want to finish with this. It's because I think that I always say the same. Education is the best weapon to end with all the harm and evil in the world, especially the harms of religion. But I have realized that conversely, the lack of education is a huge enabler to all the harms and evil of this world, including the evils and harms of religion. So I think that education is such a strong tool to help people think, help people realize what things we have been doing wrong and how to improve, that when I see these groups opposing all the education, is because either they want to have an awful planet to live in, or they don't want things to change because they are gaining something by having miserable people suffering, etc. So
Definitely. Blatant, before we move on, any quick final thoughts?
Just on what Teo just said, that was perfect. They don't want things to change. That's exactly what it is. And that's why you have such a push against actual education, because when people find out that the patriotism, again, that they've been learning their entire lives is based purely on legend and blatant lies, I said blatant, I said the thing. Blatant lies, they tend to fight for change. So if you can keep the populace ill-educated, misinformed, then you can better control them. So
yeah,
it's fascism 101.
Yeah, very, very good point.